everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and non-binary authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout that we'll be providing in the chat, and by visiting our website. A link will also be listed in the chat at strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'd also like to take a moment to especially thank those who have made a tip jar donation. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I'll be your host today, Elaine Isaak, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Please note, recording of this session by the audience is not allowed. Recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars, without permission is illegal. So, unfortunately, one of our scheduled authors today, Rue Sparks, has lost their voice. So we'll have them back at another event. We've already got them scheduled, and we will be excited to host them a little bit later on and hope that they are feeling better. Today, we are hosting 5 authors: Polly Holyoke, Rowan Hill, Liv Strom, Kristy Gardner, and Yangsze Choo. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Are you ready? Let's have some fun. Here we go. Our first reader today is Polly Holyoke. A former teacher, Polly Holyoke is the award-winning author of the Neptune trilogy for middle grade readers from Disney Hyperion and middle grade fantasy Sky Riders from Viking children's books about brave young couriers with their flying horses. She loves encouraging students to read, to write, and to unplug from their electronics to daydream. Polly, over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to my fabulous hotel room here in Denver, Colorado. I'm here I've been hosted by the Colorado State Librarians, and I just got this lovely thing from them yesterday. I am on the state list here in Colorado, and yesterday was the first day I got to see this beautiful poster that is going to be up in lots of libraries around the state. So thank you, Colorado librarians, for having such excellent taste in literature. Yes, just really, really fun to be on the list in my home state. So before I begin to read, I wanted to share with you all the inspiration behind Sky Riders. I think creative story ideas often come when you mash 2 totally different ideas together. So in this case, I combined the American Pony Express with the Pegasus myth. And then I also was really maybe trying to write a Game of Thrones for middle schoolers without all the sex and the violence, set in a vast empire. And that's how I arrived at Sky Riders. I also wanted to, where's my next set of notes? There we go. And the scene that I'm going to be sharing is the awful moment in the story where my brave sky courier, Cassandra Torson, and her sky steed, Nara, realize for the first time that the terrible chimerae, 3-headed monsters that almost destroyed Brakal, their empire, years and years ago, have returned. And Kai is one of the very few that knows how to fight these terrible beasts because her uncle, her rather eccentric uncle, is obsessed with chimera lore. So she is going to be in the hot seat here pretty soon because she actually knows how to fight these terrible things. So no more ado, we will jump into this reading. Suddenly, Nara let loose a wild clarion neigh, and he laid his ears back in shock and anger. "What's gotten into you?" Kai asked in bewilderment. "The Sky Riders do not fight Grytox," he replied. "They fight chimerae." Kai stared into the distance, her innards churning as she blinked her dry eyes against the hot desert wind. Nara had to be wrong. The Sky Riders couldn't be fighting chimerae. All the monsters had been killed centuries ago. But now Nara had flown her close enough that she could see several large tawny shapes wheeling about a band of Sky Riders. For a moment, the nearest winged beast was silhouetted against the blue sky, and it had 1, 2, 3 heads. And then the desert wind brought with it the deep, rumbling roar of a lion. "You're right," she stuttered, even as cold terror seized her. "Should we run for Derwin Station and warn Riken?" "She has to know. He has to know. He has to warn the Empire." But as Nara raced closer, it became obvious that the fight was not going well for the Sky Riders. At the center of their band, a gray sky steed fought to stay aloft, its gray wing flailing at the air. Another rider slumped forward, unconscious, against his skysteed's neck, while other riders struggled to protect their injured. The air thundered with the full-throated roars of lions and the harsh cries of the blood goat heads as they tried to tear at the skysteeds with their sharp, black horns. "We have to help them," Nara cried. "All right," Kai said. Abruptly, the panic making her thoughts tumble about disappeared, and a strange calm took their place. "Take us higher. I want the sun in the chimera's eyes." 3 strokes later, they hovered above the fight. The rider on the injured skysteed fired arrows at the chimera, and a second skyrider sliced at the beast with a sword. When one of the chimerae advanced on the injured gray, a third rider on a smaller pinto darted past the monster, obviously trying to distract it. The chimera chased the pinto for several ring strokes, but then it turned back towards the stricken skysteed again. "Let's try to hit the sand dragon's heart." She turned Nara towards the chimera, menacing the injured skysteed. A hit to the largest of the chimera's hearts could, in theory, kill the creature outright. She sent Nara into a dive and pulled her bowstring back. They flashed closer until the chimera's tan and black wings flapped beneath them. Nara swooped underneath its left wing into the creature's blind spot, and a wall of sand-colored hide slipped past. She gripped her bow tighter. The monster seemed so much bigger than Uncle Doug's had described. It was twice as tall and twice as long as Nara, and 3 arrows already protruded from its side. As they skimmed past the beast, Kai turned back and fired into the center of its chest. The lion head, surrounded by a thick brown mane, twisted on its strong neck and roared at them so loudly that her whole body vibrated from the sound. A second later, the stench of the rotting flesh caught in its teeth made her gag. The sand dragon head, on a much thinner and longer neck, struck at them in a blur of black scales and yellow fangs, but Nara had already carried them beyond its reach. The fury in the chimera's hiss made her tremble. "We have to use the tri-wires," she gasped to Nara as he climbed swiftly above the fight again. "That thing has 4 arrows in it, and it's still flying," which meant she must have missed her hard shot. She slipped the bow over her shoulders and ripped the first tri-wire from its packet. 3 razor-sharp wires, 3 feet long and weighted with balls of lead at their ends, were joined at the center with a small wooden handle. Careful to keep the wires away from Nara's wings, she whirled the tri-wire over her head until it hummed. Concentrating hard, she gauged the chimera's wing strokes. Her timing had to be perfect. With her seat and her legs, she sent Nara into another dive. This time they skimmed past the chimera on its right, and as its wing reached its lowest point, she threw the tri-wire. It went spinning through the air, sunlight glinting on its sharp copper strands. One wire sliced halfway through the chimera's thin wing hide. The second wrapped around the talon protruding from the wing's leading edge. The last caught the monster's front leg. Then they were past it. She glimpsed movement behind them and jerked hard to the right. Nara dove right as the chimera's spiked tail whistled through the space where they'd been moments earlier. "That was close. You all right?" she asked breathlessly as Nara pumped his wings to gain them altitude once more. "Yes, but the foul one is not," Nara replied with fierce satisfaction. She glanced down. The tri-wire had bound the chimera's damaged wing to its leg. Screeching frantically, the monster beat at the air with its good wing as it plunged in tight circles towards the ground. One of the remaining 4 chimerae broke off the attack and dove after it. Moments after the first one crashed, the second one landed on top of it and began to feed. So the fight scene goes on from there. I don't want to give too much more away except to say that Kai does save an imperial prince in the course of this fight out in the desert, and their friendship becomes key to the rest of the story. Basically, her quest in this first book in this series is to get people of the capital to listen to her, because again, she knows how to fight the chimera the ancient ways. New ways have been developed and they're not nearly as effective. And so that's a pretty tall order for a frontier girl from the fringes of the empire to have to go speak truth to power and get them to listen to her. So that's basically the plot of lots of fighting and lots of friendship and things that middle grade kids like, I hope. And so that's book 1. And I'm just really happy to say that book 2 just came out May 7th. So it's a very brand new book in the world. And origin stories are such a big deal. So this is really kind of like the origin story of my Sky Steeds. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to turn this on to our next reader.
Thank you so much, Polly. That was super exciting. Really enjoyed that one. And book 2 is already out, so this is the perfect time to jump in on this series and fly away. All right. Our second reader today is Rowan Hill.
Hi.
Rowan Hill is an American-Australian horror author currently living in America. She loves mashing genres, flawed women who occasionally murder, and a plot twist within plot twists. She has many short story credits, a novella, and a novel, and her debut collection, No Fair Maidens, From Earth to Mars, will be released with Journal Stone / Trepidatio Press in July 2024. Rowan, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Elaine. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Rowan. My collection comes out in 4 weeks now. No Fair Maidens from Earth to Mars, but today I'm going to be reading from Foxfire, which is my first novel, and I sold it as a Agatha Christie times Quentin Tarantino. Kind of everything happens in one night. I'll just start off. I really kind of struggled to think of where I should start reading, and I'm just going to put you in the middle where we have two current survivors trying to make their escape by harnessing the reindeer. And all of this is very true. I went to this place. I experienced not the murdery sides of these things, but how to harness reindeer and whatnot. So we are with Matthias and Carly, an older gentleman and an older Finnish gentleman who's trying to run a resort, and Carly, a young Australian woman who grew up in the bush. Matthias crouched, reaching under for the hanging strap, and the reindeer's smooth belly rose and fell and only slightly flinched as Matthias pulled the sled bars beside his haunches and strapped him in. Carly crooned softly to the older Levi, stroking his neck as he pressed close to him, stuck between the two. Matthias exhaled shakily, listening to her kind tones, hearing familiar tenderness in them and the ones his father often used. He pushed the words out. Carly continued caressing the bull, but gave Matthias her attention. If I don't make it, please help Ino. She never wanted to be here. She was only helping out an old man. Please get her out. Carly's hand paused on the reindeer's neck, and she smirked, an odd gesture on a cold, dark bridge. Well, how do you know I'm not the one killing everybody? He stared pointedly at her hand stroking the deer. He didn't want to mention any of his thoughts about what was doing this, but clearly someone who calmed a reindeer with soothing words most likely wouldn't kill anybody. She looked to her own hand and caught his meaning and scratched the fur. All right, old-timer, I'll do my best. Save your daughter, no worries. He nodded, inexplicably relieved, and cinched the last buckle across Toivoy's low chest, affectionately rubbing its neck, when the reindeer's head flinched, startled by something. Rising to crouch, Matthias peeked over the reindeer's back, viewing nothing but the white snow of the driveway leading through the forest to the main road. But then, the very snow moved, right before his eyes, white on white, shifting, and a strange whip scored the air. An arrow abruptly appeared in Toivoy's hide flank, and the animal brayed, immediately bolting. Its chest knocked Matthias to the ground, and the connected sleigh ran over his whole body as the panicked reindeer tore away and back to the house with the frantic jingle of a bell. Less than a second later, a blink, another whip sailed over the bridge, and the second reindeer cried a painful belt, outmatched by Carly's raw scream. From the ground where he lay, Matthias rolled with a broken leg and witnessed an arrow piercing through the back of Carly's shoulder and into the reindeer she had been hugging. The arrow's feathers were near to her coat, meaning the arrowhead punched deep into the reindeer's neck, and the two were locked, prisoners of the same shaft. Levy, the reindeer, attempted rearing on his hind legs, but Carly and her new unfamiliar weight toppled him sidewards. The wood railing cracked beneath them and all at once broke with a snap. The reindeer fell over the side of the bridge, Carly dragged with him by the arrow piercing them both. They toppled into the river and out of Matthias's sight, and Carly's shriek was replaced with the snapping ice and the muffled splash of hungry Arctic water devouring them. On elbows and knees, he scrambled to the bridge's edge, only to find a large black hole in the middle of a narrow strip where the two had dropped into the river, pooled under the ice flowing to the sacred lake. Matthias exhaled. It had all happened in 5 seconds, no more. He inhaled, and a fierce driving pain in his chest made him roll to his back. Something inside his old body was also impaled. He could feel it as sure as he could feel he was at fault for all of this, an innate knowledge. He stared overhead, rivers of green light coursing through the sky, mirroring the black one below. And in his lower periphery, the snow ran to him. Plop, 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 plop. A white figure rushed to the remaining railing, examining below, and then smacked its hands on the wood in a very human-like manner. "You're not my Haltaji," he murmured. He was benumbed. He was beyond cold. Matthias was once indifferent to the cold. He grew up in the north that made Vikings hard. He might have been a failure as a husband and man, always scrambling for money, a living, always thinking up the next scheme, but his body should have been immune to the cold. This cold was different. It was final. He couldn't hold his head up anymore and let it fall to the soft snow. The Revontule swelled in pulses, like new water after years of drought, water slowly and surely creating a new course. Strong hands tugged his shoulders, yanking his whole body up until his head partially hung off the side of the bridge, and something sharp stabbed the soft, fatty folds of his neck. It was a blade of fire digging inside him. More agony erupted, and hot blood trickled off the back of his nape. He tried to scream, but those muscles didn't work anymore and remained slack. A hand, ungloved, clawed his scalp and lifted it to meet his eyes. It was Lempo. Angry, vengeful god of the wilderness stared at him. Those eyes were feral and wild and cursed and reminded him of all the bad things he had done in his life. Not terrible, but not right. Did anyone try to be terrible in their short lives? Blood left his body, life falling into the pitch water beneath, and something stirred in his memory as the cold seeped up from his booted toes. A story of his father's in the lake. His father had taken his final sleep in the lake. Cold crawled up his legs with icicles for fingers. There was something about a sacrifice in his family and their blood and his blood. The devastating chill curled his gut and dinner solid, a hefty weight sitting in his body like a large stone. A story of the lake and the forest and his family and their duty and their protection and their custodianship over sacred land that should never be taken or stolen or used ill. His chest with its broken organ slowed, and Matthias stared dreamily up at the Revontule, the foxfire, a flare of red unexpectedly surging through the green. He was dreaming. Matthias no longer felt his legs or body, but had the distinct sensation of vertigo as Lempo lifted his 2 heavy feet and he fell through the frigid air to frozen water. Choking the terrible numbing water, he was surprised to discover his body nearly devoid of light, floated. Ushered down the fast-moving river, ice cut his body, though he didn't notice much, transfixed by celestial light. The water rumbled, the riverbed churned, and sound and movement shuddered everything everywhere all at once, and Matthias could only lax into numbness. Above, emerald, lush, and wild clashed with primal vermilion. The colors enameled the sky in broad strokes, guiding his way. They showed him the path, and faces took shape within the Revontule. Beautiful, terrible faces, horrific, familiar faces, bears, wolverines, foxes, reindeer, wolves, lynx, seals, figures of lore, ancient, terrible deities floating in the sky in the gateway to heaven or hell, waiting to take him into the dark memories of his lineage. in. I'm going to pass it on to the next reader. Thank you so much, Strong Women, Strange Worlds, for having me.
Wow, that was really spectacular. We were all spellbound. Terrifying. I can't wait to find out what happens next. So definitely you'll want to follow Rowan and find her on social medias and see when her next work is coming out. Thank you so much for that reading. All right. Our third reader today is Liv Strom. Liv Strom is a Swedish-Swiss writer with stories in Apex and Hexagon, among others. As a writer with aphantasia, she cannot visualize anything. She considers it a magic power to write characters who live on in others' minds. She's currently working on the Tales of Bones and Roses novel series. Liv, can't wait to hear your reading.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me as well. So I love fairy tales and mythology, so there's no surprise for anyone who would know me that my main series that I worked on for the last years are in an epic fantasy world where the main city is Tal, where we will be reading, and the first books are a twisted Cinderella retelling with lots of epic fantasy, a bit of romance, rebels, and magic. And I will be reading the scene where the prince just returned to the city because he is getting married, but his foreign bride is not there. And our Cinderella, Vanya, has been forced by the evil stepfather to try to steal the glass crown of the future queen of the city. She just snatched it at the engagement ball, ran into the forest, is being chased, and was slammed into a tree. And that's where I will start. The pressure on my chest lessened, and I was yanked around. Trapped between his muscular arms, I found myself looking up at a stormy face I had not been able to forget. A face everyone in Tal knew. I was, after all, still clutching the crown of his betrothed. Crown Prince Dmitry Alexander Ivanov's remarkable brown and blue eyes widened as the mage light came close enough to illuminate my face. His painful grip slackened before he withdrew his hands, as if burned, and stepped back. Though I should not, though it made no sense. I missed his warm hands on my arms. I could only return his stare, fear freezing me in place. What was he doing? Could I run? He had all the advantages, but at least he was not manhandling me anymore. Maybe in the dark he had not seen that I was dressed like a noblewoman. Stall until I can use my blade or see a chance to escape, I decided. Until then, deny and always stick to the lie. At least he seems to be unarmed. In the distance, the firelight had died down. Soon, the guards would return to their posts and notice the crown missing. Cold sweat coated my palms, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I made my body relax, a smile playing on my lips. Like in the theater, you only had to convince yourself to convince others, and I was great at lying to myself. With the bow my mother taught me as a child, I swept the ruined silk dress and lowered my head without taking my eyes off the prince. He was, if anything, both more beautiful and sterner up close. The jet black hair braided away from his face, the wide jaw clenched, and his nose broken at least once. Cheekbones sharp enough to cut, but dared touch. The famous eyes, one blue and one brown, both equally piercing. He looked like the people in Lowtown with nothing left to lose. Dangerous. Threatening and tricking a noble was a capital crime. Touching a royal. With a raised eyebrow, I ignored all I knew and did what my stepfather and sister had forbidden me. I improvised. You don't really want to marry a foreign princess, do you, my prince? Without a crown, no marriage. It's better for all, no? It was a wild guess, but he had not seemed happy to be riding to his own wedding, and instead of celebrating or getting his bride, he had been lurking in the shadows with me. Even in the artificial light, I could see his cheeks redden and fists clench. Instinctively, I pressed up against the tree again, and inched my hand toward a hidden knife. I could tear it out and thrust it into him in one smooth motion. I don't wish to drag anyone into marriage against her will, he said. But this time, neither party has a choice. It was decided before we were 5 years old. I hesitated as he held out his hand for the glass crown. My chance of escape would greatly increase without it. He might even let me go. Better for me and my sister to remain in debt than dead. Alive, there was always a chance for a better future. With a sigh, I placed the circlet in his hand. Joined by the glass, a jolt surged through me, pulling at something inside, as if he wanted to eat my very spirit. The throbbing bruise from when I hit the wall the previous night flared in pain, and my coiled hair must surely have stood on end. As one, we let go, and the crown landed on the ground with a dull clang. The prince pulled his hand through his hair, loosening the careful braid, and looked at me with inscrutable eyes. And that, Princess Helia von Heskin, is why they want us to marry. I stared at him, his words repeating in my mind without making any more sense than when they left his mouth. What? He scowled, his face all sharp angles in the cold, magical light. Don't lie. I don't understand why you would not announce your arrival. But your court painter captured your likeness well enough, Princess. You are even wearing your own colors. In no fantasy could I have invented this, pretended this princess. He was nuts, bat-bitten. He thought I was his bride. The prince picked up the crown from the ground and offered me his free arm, his back straight as a spear. My eyes flickered to the dark trees. Maybe he was crazy enough to let me go. Surely he would not hurt the princess. Quick as any street thief, he grabbed my arm. I don't want to lock my bride up like a common prisoner, he said. But I will if you force me. We were both raised to this. It's a matter of contracts. If you want to break it, you have to negotiate it with my father, and good luck to you. He had tried. I could hear it in his hard voice. Though stealing your own crown was certainly inventive, he continued. Without it, perhaps even he would delay the wedding. In silence, he led me back through the forest, and soon calls could be heard across the grounds. The guards knew the crown was gone. I had failed. So that's the opening, or the meet cute, of Stealing Glass, which is part of a duology of Cinderella retellings. It's a second book that came out early this year. And it's a connected series in the same world, where book number 4 is coming out in October with a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. And I would really love you all if you check them out. And thank you so much for being here. And I will hand it back, I think.
That was so much fun. You had us all on the edge of our seats going, will they, won't they? I'm sure a lot of folks will be picking that up to see what happens next. Thank you for that great reading, Liv. Our fourth reader today is Kristy Gardner. Kristy Gardner is a bi-speculative fiction writer. She is the author of the Broken Stars sci-fi trilogy and the award-winning cookbook, Cooking with Cocktails. Furnished with degrees in gender studies and sociology, she crafts queer characters that adventure through space, time, and emotional maelstroms, questioning what identity and home really mean. Kristy.
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from book 2 in the Broken Stars series called The Darkest Stars. If I can find the page. A rush of curiosity fueled Calais's legs, propelling her forward. She bypassed the shiny box with the food and made straight for the corridor. She moved quickly. If she was caught now, she didn't know what they'd do to her. Sure, they'd given her a sparkly new uniform, but she wasn't really one of them. Not yet. She still had very little clearance. She hadn't even met the hybrids who'd supposedly just arrived. She was among the others, but was still other to them. The lights flickered above. Calay's breath caught in her throat. Something echoed back the way from which she'd come. She kept moving, glanced behind her, bracing herself for what might jump through the shadows that disappeared and reappeared with every flicker of light. But she was alone. She reached the door. It was as she remembered it. Unlike the rest of the ship, this one had no white panels. It was rectangular, a large black window at the center. She peered through the glass and couldn't see a thing. For all she knew, there was nothing beyond this gateway but oblivion. Or things that go bump in the night, she thought. She shivered. Her heart thumped against her chest. She wrapped her hand around the cold metal handle. That was another thing that none of the other doors seemed to have. They operated with motion sensors, movement. This one was secured with a good old-fashioned steel bolt, as if the others wanted to keep people out or lock them in. Calais shook off the creeping anxiety oozing down her back. This could be her last chance to find out what exactly was down there. She squeezed the handle and slipped through. The door latched firmly behind her. The blackness was impenetrable, complete, the most terrifying thing Calais could have imagined. While she knew it was going to be dark, she'd expected some of the light would have fought its way through the window. It didn't. With breath short in her lungs, she shuffled forward, her hands tracing the wall for a light switch. The toe of her boot caught on the lip of what she was sure was a sharp metal grate. She stumbled on it. The metallic sound echoed through the dark space. 1, 2, 3 flailing steps, and a long metal bar caught her by the hips. She desperately grasped at it. A railing. Where there was a railing, there were stairs. Her arms extended along the bar, she took baby steps, hoping she wouldn't pitch forward to her death. She was right. The railing was long, cold, and straight until it curved sharply downward. She lowered a foot to find a narrow foothold. The other one followed. Taking each stair one at a time, she climbed down further into the darkness. 1 minute passed. Another. It seemed the staircase would never end. The blackness, too. It was as if what she was feeling inside had finally bubbled up and out of her, swallowing her whole. After a lifetime, the grates beneath her feet ended, giving way to a smoother, more slippery surface. Calais imagined in her mind's eye she was likely standing in a room not unlike the loading bay. If that was true, she'd reached the bottom. Still, she clung to the railing, her breath shallow and ragged. It was the only sound, and it was deafening. She thought about calling out just to cut through the silence, but the risk of getting caught somewhere she didn't belong sent a chill down her spine, which was already coated in cold sweat. Besides, it was highly unlikely anyone would hear her down here, in the dark, alone. There was nobody down there with her. Was there? She hugged herself, clenched her eyes shut, tried to slow her thoughts. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat. Of course she was alone. But then, as much as she tried, she couldn't stop the question from circling in the corners of her mind. What was down here? She pried her cramped fingers off the railing. She tried to recall the layout of the loading bay. It had been a ridiculously large room, brimming with pods. Through the glass dome, she'd seen stars. When Calais looked up here, none of their twinkling light made it down to her. It was just more darkness. She didn't know how that was possible, but then again, nothing from the last week seemed real. Yet it existed. Calais focused on that fact, that and physics. The room must have 4 walls, for God's sake. There has to be a switch somewhere, she thought. With the railing as her starting point and her arms stretched ahead, Calais made her way to what she guessed was the closest wall. She bumped into it about a few thousand moments later. It was rigid, formed by several curved columns like the inside of the pods. That's new. she thought. The loading bay's walls had been smooth like the floor. So why was this one different? She traced the surface, inching forward, desperate for something, anything that would shed some light on her current situation. She found what felt like a button. Small, flat, recessed against the wall. This had to be it. Her mind spun as she realized it could be a button for anything. It could open a wall like a garage door. She still wasn't sure she could survive in the alien atmosphere. That would be bad. Really bad. It could be an alarm, and if it was, it might alert the others to her location, and she could get in serious trouble, as if she wasn't already in serious trouble. Or hell, for all she knew, the button could be a self-destruct switch, and she'd incinerate herself and anything else that was in that room. She took a deep breath, exhaled. She pushed the button. A loud buzz filled the air, a mechanical whir. Then there was light. Calais covered her eyes, winced. It was bright, brighter than bright. It made her yearn for the darkness she'd wanted so desperately to escape. She covered her face with her hands, peeked through the pink gaps in her fingers. And then Calais stumbled back against the wall and shrieked. Like I said, this is book 2 in the Broken Stars series. The Stars in Their Eyes is book 1. And book 3, the epic conclusion, releases on October 1st, and it's called The Stars Inside Us. Thank you.
Great stuff. That was so tense. We were like, don't go in the basement. Please, someone give her a flashlight. Thank you so much for sharing that little adventure with us. All right. Our final reader for today is Yangsze Choo. Yangsze Choo is the New York Times best-selling author of The Ghost Bride, now a Netflix original series, The Night Tiger, a Reese's Book Club pick, and Big Jubilee Read for Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, and The Fox Wife. She loves to eat and read, often at the same time. Yangsze.
Hello, and thank you. I loved hearing everyone's stories. I was mesmerized. So I'm going to read from my new novel, The Fox Wife, and I'm just actually going to read from the beginning of the book. If any of you are familiar with the East Asian, the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean mythology of fox spirits who can turn themselves into very attractive men and women, well, this is a book about them. Manchuria, 1908. Perhaps you know this story. Late one evening, a beautiful woman comes knocking on an unsuspecting scholar's door. Who is it? The young man asks, peering out into the neglected garden where flowers and shrubs bend into strange shapes in the moonlight. Let me in. She has a bewitching smile and a jar of his favorite rice wine. And he does, hesitant at first, because he's supposed to be studying for the imperial examinations. Why is she alone outside this remote country villa? And why do her eyes gleam strangely in the rain-wet darkness? But he tells himself it's all right. She's likely a prostitute sent by his friends as a joke. They drink the wine, one thing leads to another, and despite her blushes and his untouched pile of books, he has one of the most enjoyable evenings he can recall. Except he can't really remember it. The details are misted in lamplight and laughter. But he must see her again. He seizes her hands, such long-fingered, sharp-nailed hands, and won't let her go. My home is over there, she says, pointing at a curious little hill. If you follow the road, it's the 4th house from the top. The next night he sets out after his old servant has gone to bed. If he paid attention, he'd see that the road peters out until it's barely a trail through overgrown grass. But he doesn't notice, so besotted is he. There are many curious houses along the way, all with darkened windows like empty sockets. Fine mansions, little hovels, each with the name of a family prominently written on its lintel. The fourth house from the top of the hill is an imposing mansion. The name on its gate is Hall of Fox. Again and again he visits her, neglecting his studies while a pile of unopened letters accumulates from his angry parents. His skin shrivels like a withered leaf, his tonsils swell, and his spine curves. Finally, the worried old servant brings in a monk to exorcise evil spirits. When the spell is broken, the scholar howls and weeps in humiliated fury, tearing his clothes with trembling hands. A raiding party is made up of local peasants who swear there are no houses or grand estates on that crooked little hill, only a long abandoned graveyard. The fourth grave from the top is constructed as Chinese graves are, like a little house half sunk into the hill. Using hoes and spades, they break into it to discover that it has become a fox's den. This story usually ends with the shape-shifting fox boiled to death or skewered by an angry mob. That shouldn't happen, however, if you're careful. Most foxes are. How else could we survive for hundreds of years? The fox in that tale was greedy and stupid, giving the rest of us a bad reputation. Foxes, people say, are wicked women. Even in the best of times, it isn't easy for someone like me to make a living. To catch a train from Mukden to Dalian, for example, I had to make my way out of the grasslands of Kirin. The first day was the hardest, as I required clothing. I ended up dragging a peasant's blouse and cotton trousers off a washing line. A virtuous fox should not steal, but I needed the clothes desperately. Appearing by the roadside as a naked young woman is just asking for trouble. I exist as either a small canid with thick fur, pointed ears, and neat black feet, or a young woman. Neither are safe forms in a world run by men. Frankly, I'd prefer to look like someone's grandmother. That would at least give me some dignity appropriate to my years. Which leads me to note in my diary that though most tales focus on the beautiful female foxes who live by devouring chi or life force, little is said about the males. Women who run around willfully doing whatever they please are bound to be censured. A handsome, cunning man is a different matter. Most male foxes are only forced to retire or fake their deaths when their uncanny, ageless looks start to disturb people. Don't get me started on the unfairness of this. I generally avoid males of my own race. Once I had clothes, I continued along, begging for rides. I had no money, of course. That was a consequence of living in the grasslands, watching the clouds drift across the wide blue sky, and eating field mice. I hadn't been to a city in ages. When I reached Mukden, there were foreigners spending money in the streets and starving peasants fleeing famine. Before Mukden had become the old Manchu capital of the north, it had been Shenyang, the garrison stronghold of the Ming Empire. The world kept changing, but battles for cities remained the same. It took me longer than I'd expected to settle some personal business, about which I'll tell you more in the future, but I managed to get onto a train by allowing a pimp to hustle me. I told him I urgently wished to go to the port city of Dalian. I see, he said, stroking my arm, gauging the quality of the meat. You look very healthy. You don't have tuberculosis, do you? I shook my head. I'm strong. I can pull a plough as well as any ox. You won't be doing the ploughing, said he, smiling. Come with me. I've a good job for you as a nursemaid. He bought us tickets, third class, hard seats. Scent of sweat, salt fish, the iron tang of hot metal. The train was a revelation. I'd seen it before, charging across the grasslands like a metal horse, snorting billows of black soot. I thought about riding it, but I'd been busy then, too busy and too happy. With a snarl, I turned away from the window. I didn't want to think about what I'd lost. At least we were travelling fast. My heart thrummed with impatience. I was eaten up with rage and anxiety that my prey might escape me if I didn't get to Darlien soon. Thank you very much. And yes, I actually I read the audio books for all of my novels, and the Night Tiger was actually a finalist for the audio awards. So thank you very much, everyone. I've very much enjoyed everyone's readings.
That was a fantastic reading. Thank you so much, Yangsze. So this concludes our reading for today. I would like to thank everybody so much for coming.